In 1951, a school inspector walked into a Yorkshire classroom and watched a 9-year-old boy slit a dead rabbit from throat to belly with a borrowed penknife and peel the skin away in one clean pull before the inspector had finished writing the date. The boy named 14 edible plants without looking up. He set a snare on the desk to show how the loop should sit. The inspector wrote it all down as a concern. He thought the child was behind on his reading. They said it was backward. They said it was unhygienic. They said these children belonged to a world that ought to be left behind. Your grandmother knew every one of those plants by the age of 7. The boy that Inspector pitied had skills most adults today would pay to relearn. Number 14 could feed a family of 4 through a winter. Number 3 was so ordinary nobody bothered to write it down. And that is exactly why it nearly vanished. What you are about to learn is not nostalgia. It kept families alive for 1,000 years. Let us count down. Number 20. Reading the sky before a single drop fell. Your grandfather did not own a weather app. He owned a pair of eyes and 40 years of his own grandfather's instruction. He watched the way the swifts flew low before rain, the way the smoke from the chimney pressed down instead of rising, the way the ash leaves turned their pale undersides to a coming storm. By 8, he could tell you whether the hay could safely stay out another night. This was not folklore. It was atmospheric pressure, read through living instruments. Low pressure forces insects down, and the birds that eat them follow. Smoke sinks in damp, heavy air. The science is sound. Your grandfather simply learned it through his skin instead of a screen. He never once checked a phone. He looked up. The knowledge cost nothing, and was never wrong by more than a few hours. Today a child can name a dozen cartoon characters and not one cloud. That is the trade we made. The sky still speaks. We simply stopped teaching anyone to listen. Number 19. Mending a sock so the darn outlasted the wool. Open the drawer of any house before 1950 and you would find a darning mushroom, a smooth wooden dome, worn shiny by use. Every child learned to stretch the sock over it and weave the hole shut, warp threads first, then weft, until the patch was stronger than the cloth around it. A girl of 10 could mend a heel in the time it takes you to read this segment. Make do and mend, the government called it. They printed pamphlets. They begged the nation to repair rather than replace, because in 1943 there was no wool to spare. Then the war ended, and the clothing industry needed you to stop. A mended sock is a sock not bought. By 1980, darning had vanished from British classrooms entirely. She did it by lamplight, and her children had warm feet through 6 winters on a single pair. The average British household now throws away 30 kilograms of textiles a year. Your grandmother threw away nothing, not a single thread. Number 18. Catching, gutting, and cooking a fish from the village stream. Your grandfather knelt on the bank of a Welsh river before he was 9, hands in the cold water, learning to tickle a trout, to stroke its belly so gently it forgot to be afraid, then lift it clean from the water in one motion. No rod, no line, no license, just patience and cold fingers. Then he learned the harder part, the single cut along the belly, the clean sweep of the gut, the fish over a fire of green hazel by dusk. Food from water to flame in under an hour, and he had done all of it himself. Today, tickling trout is a criminal offense under the Salmon and Freshwater Fisheries Act of 1975. A child doing what your grandfather did would, in the eyes of the law, be poaching. He fed himself from a stream that belonged to everyone and no one. He asked permission from nobody. The river is still there. The fish are still there. Only the child who knew how is missing. Number 17. Keeping a whole winter's food without a fridge. Today, a British family spends nearly £100 a year simply running the refrigerator that keeps their food from spoiling. Your great-grandmother spent nothing because she understood something a machine made us forget. Cold is free, and the earth provides it. Walk into a cottage in 1890, and you would find the larder built on the north wall, the coolest side of the house, with a slate or marble shelf that held the chill of the ground long into summer. Below it, often, a cellar dug into the earth where the temperature never rose above 10 degrees. Eggs were turned in water glass and kept fresh for 8 months. Butter sat in a glazed crock under a muslin cloth, the cloth's edge resting in water so that evaporation drew the heat away. A cooler that ran on physics alone and never on electricity. The children knew the system intimately. It was their job to carry the milk down, to turn the eggs, to check the apples laid out on slatted shelves so that no 2 fruits touched and 1 rotten apple could not spoil the row. They learned that a clamp of earth and straw would hold potatoes and carrots sound through to spring, that onions platted and hung would last till the new crop came. By 10, a child could provision a household through the dark half of the year. This knowledge did not fade on its own. The electrical industry of the 1930s spent enormous sums persuading the British public that the cold larder was unsanitary, primitive, a thing of the poor. The refrigerator was sold not as a convenience, but as a moral upgrade. It worked. Within 2 generations, the larder was a cupboard for tins, the cellar was filled in, and a family that once spent nothing to keep its food now pays a monthly bill to a power company for the privilege. She kept a year of food fresh with slate, straw, and a wet cloth. We replaced her with a machine that hums in the dark and sends us a bill. The cold was always free. Somebody simply found a way to charge us for it. Number 16. Lighting and keeping a fire that would not go out. A child of 6 in the Scottish Highlands could lay a fire properly. The tinder nest of dried grass and birch bark, the kindling teepee above it, the larger wood waiting in order of thickness. They knew that a fire needs 3 things, and only 3: fuel, air, and heat, and that a fire that smokes is a fire starved of air. But the real skill was older and quieter. It was learning to s'more the fire at night, to bank the glowing peat under a careful blanket of ash so that it never died, so that the same fire burned in the hearth for years without ever once going cold. The morning's flame was last night's embers, woken. Your grandmother did not need a study to know this. She had warm porridge before sunrise and a hearth that had not gone out in living memory. The skill is nearly gone now. Central heating asks nothing of you but a direct debit. The fire kept the house alive. A child kept the fire alive. That chain is now broken. Number 15. Foraging the hedgerow from spring to first frost. Your grandmother walked the hedgerows of Kent with a basket on her arm and a calendar in her head. Wild garlic in April, its broad leaves carpeting the damp woodland edge. Elderflower in May for cordial. Then the long abundance of autumn. Blackberries, sloes, rosehips, hawthorn haws, hazelnuts, crab apples, each ripening in its appointed week. She knew the rosehip held more vitamin C than any orange, weight for weight. During the war, the government knew it too, and organized children to gather hundreds of tons of hips for syrup when the citrus ships could no longer run. A whole generation of British children was kept healthy through winter on the contents of a hedge. Use them. They grow free along every country lane in Britain. The hedge still fruits every single autumn. Most people now walk past 1,000 pounds of food and call it weeds. Number 14. Growing enough food on a patch of ground to feed the family. Dig for victory, the posters said. And dig they did. By 1943, the British public had turned 1.5 million allotments and back gardens into a food-growing engine that produced over 1 million tons of vegetables a year. Children were not spectators in this. A boy of 10 had his own row of potatoes and was held responsible for it. A child learned the whole cycle: how to sow broad beans in November so they came early, how to earth up potatoes, how to save seed from the best plants so next year's crop cost nothing, how to rotate the beds so the soil never tired. This was not a hobby. It was the family larder, and a competent child could grow a meaningful share of what they ate. It was removed from the school curriculum in the early 1970s, just as supermarkets began their great expansion across Britain. A child who grows food is a child who will one day question the price of it. She fed 4 children from 30 feet of ground and a packet of seed saved from last year. The ground is still there. The seed still grows. Only the teaching stopped. Number 13. Knowing the plants that healed before the chemist opened. Long before a prescription, there was the garden gate, and the field beyond it, and every British child knew the green pharmacy growing in it. This was not superstition, it was the accumulated trial and error of 1,000 years, and a great deal of it was simply correct. Your grandmother reached for dock leaves when a nettle stung, and she was right. Dock sap is mildly alkaline and soothes the acidic sting. She gave a feverish child willow bark tea, and she was right again. Willow bark contains salicin, the compound from which aspirin was first synthesized. She packed a cut with cobweb and honey, and a child watched the bleeding stop because honey is genuinely antibacterial and has been used on wounds for 5,000 years. Garlic for the chest, thyme for the cough, comfrey poultices for a sprain, chamomile for a child who could not sleep. The whole system lived in her hands and passed, year by year, into the hands of her children. Then came a deliberate severing. Through the early 20th century, the emerging pharmaceutical industry, working alongside a newly professionalized medical establishment, recategorized this knowledge as quackery. The 1941 Pharmacy and Medicines Act and later regulation steadily restricted what an ordinary person could gather, prepare, and offer as a remedy. The herbalist became suspect. The grandmother who once treated a village was now, in the eyes of the law, practicing medicine without a license. The knowledge did not move into the chemist's shop. It was simply broken up, and the useful parts patented, repackaged, and sold back at a markup of several thousand%. There is real danger in some of the old remedies, and not every folk cure was sound. But the wholesale destruction of the tradition threw out a vast working knowledge along with the errors. She mended scrapes and fevers and coughs for 40 years with what grew within 100 yards of her door. Her children lived. Her grandchildren live still. The willow still grows by the water. The aspirin in your cabinet is its distant, expensive grandchild. Number 12. Reading the land to find clean water. A child raised on a Cornish farm knew where the water was before anyone dug. They followed the rushes and the kingcups, the plants that only grow where the ground stays wet. They knew that water gathers at the foot of a slope, that a line of richer green across a dry field marks a spring beneath, that the willow seeks the buried stream. By 12, a child could find water on unfamiliar land within an afternoon. Your grandfather did not need a survey. He read the ground the way you read a page. The skill mattered because clean water meant survival, and a family that could find its own spring answered to no one for it. Now the water arrives through a pipe, owned by a company, billed by the quarter. We forgot how to find it the moment we were made to pay for it. The spring still rises. We simply stopped knowing where to look. Number 11. Tying the knot that held a life together. A child in a Cornish fishing village could tie a dozen knots by the age of 7, each for a purpose. The bowline that would not slip under load and would not jam after. The clove hitch for a post, the reef knot to bind a bandage, the sheet bend to join 2 ropes of different thickness. This was not play. A bad knot on a boat was a death. The hands learned it until the fingers knew it without the mind. A child tied a bowline in the dark, in the wind, with cold fingers, because one day their life might depend on doing exactly that. She mended nets. He lashed the load. The whole family was held together by rope and the knowledge of how to work it. How many adults today can tie a single knot that will hold and then release? The rope is still sold in every hardware shop. The knowing went overboard. Number 10. Preserving the glut so nothing was ever wasted. When the plums came all at once, as they always do, your grandmother did not watch them rot. She and her children turned a 3-week glut into a year of food. Jam by the dozen jars, the kitchen thick with the smell of boiling fruit and sugar, chutneys from the windfall apples and green tomatoes, beans salted down in stone crocks, eggs preserved in water glass against the winter when the hens stopped laying. The Women's Institute built an entire wartime operation on this skill. In 1940 alone, WR members and their children preserved over 1,000 tons of fruit that would otherwise have been lost, sugar specially released by the government because they understood that a jar of jam was a jar of survival. Every child stirred the pot. Every child knew that a sealed jar in September was a full belly in February. The harvest still comes all at once. We let supermarkets ration it back to us a punnet at a time, all year, at a price. Number 9. Making warmth from what the sheep gave free. In a Welsh hill cottage, a child learned wool from the animal forward. They watched the shearing, helped wash and card the fleece, learned to spin it on a drop spindle, a skill a 6-year-old's fingers could manage, and then to knit it into the gansey, the dense oiled jumper that kept a fisherman alive in a North Sea wind. Nothing was bought. The warmth came off the back of the hill. A child knitted their first square before they could write neatly. By 12, they could turn the heel of a sock, the hardest trick in knitting, without a pattern. He was never cold, and the cost of keeping him warm was a sheep that would have grown the wool regardless. The hills are still full of sheep. We now import acrylic from across the world to do badly what wool did for nothing. Number 8. Building a shelter that kept the weather out. Today, a British family cannot put up so much as a garden room without wrestling planning permission, building regulations, and a council officer with a clipboard. The cost of complying often exceeds the cost of building. Your great-grandfather would not have understood a word of it. He raised his own roof. In the countryside, a cottage was something a family and its neighbors built with their hands from what the land gave. Cob walls of clay, straw, and earth, 2 feet thick, that held warmth in winter and coolness in summer, and cost nothing but labor. The children worked the cob with their bare feet, treading the mud and straw into the dense mixture that would stand for 300 years. Many cob cottages built this way are still standing, and still lived in across Devon today. A child learned that shelter was something you made, not something you were granted. They learned to thatch with reed or straw, to lay a dry stone wall without a drop of mortar so that it stood a century against the Highland weather, to set a windowsill to throw the rain clear of the wall. The knowledge of how to keep the weather out, the single oldest survival skill there is, lived in ordinary hands. Then shelter became a permitted activity. The Town and Country Planning Act of 1947 and the building regulations that followed placed the act of raising a roof firmly under the control of the state and the qualified professional. There were real reasons: safety, sanitation, the chaos of unplanned sprawl. But something was lost in the bargain. A family that could once house itself now rents the right to be housed, and a generation that could once build now cannot legally lay a wall. He built the house his grandchildren were born in with his own hands from the field behind it. We now sign a 30-year mortgage for the privilege of a box we are not allowed to alter. The clay is still in the ground. The skill is what we paved over. Number 7. Keeping hens and taking the daily egg. Your grandmother kept half a dozen hens at the bottom of the garden, and her children ran out each morning to gather the eggs still warm from the straw. The birds cost almost nothing: kitchen scraps, a handful of corn, the run of the garden for slugs and grubs. In return, a steady supply of the most complete protein a family could ask for, fresh every single day. The children learned the whole of it: how to tell the point of lay pullet, how to clip a wing, how to fox-proof the run at dusk, how to tell a broody hen from a sick one. A child of 9 could run the whole flock. During the war, the government begged families to do exactly this, and over 1 million households answered. Eggs you keep are eggs no ship has to carry. She had eggs through every shortage of the war while the shops stood empty. The hen does not know there is a war on. It simply lays. The garden is still there. The hen still lays. We just decided it was easier to buy the egg from a lorry. Number 6. Swimming and surviving in cold, open water. Every child in a riverside village learned to swim in the river itself, not a heated pool with a lifeguard and a wristband, but the cold, living water where they would actually need the skill. They learned to read the current, to respect the cold, to float when tired, to get themselves and a struggling friend back to the bank. It was a survival skill in the plainest sense. The river was the road, the larder, and the danger all at once. They did it barefoot and free, in water that belonged to everyone. Now that same river is too polluted to enter, and the company that owns the right to your water discharges raw sewage into it for hundreds of thousands of hours a year while posting a profit. The child cannot swim there because the water is no longer clean enough to swim in. She learned to survive the water. We now have to be warned away from it. The river still runs to the sea. We simply poisoned the place a child used to learn. Number 5. Snaring and trapping a meal from the field. A child on an interwar farm could set a snare in a rabbit run with the precise placement. Only experience teaches the loop a hand's width off the ground, set where the run narrows by a hedge, anchored so the catch was clean. Rabbit was the everyday meat of the rural poor, and a child who could trap one was a child who brought home dinner. They learned to skin it in a single practiced pull, to joint it, to use the fur for a lining and the rest for the pot. Nothing wasted. A 9-year-old could feed the family from a field that, to anyone else, looked empty. Your grandfather did not need a butcher. He needed a length of wire and a knowledge of where the rabbit ran. The Hunting Act and a thicket of regulation have since made much of this a criminal matter, and the knowledge has all but died with the men who held it. The rabbits still run the hedgerows in their thousands. The field is still full. We simply forgot it was a larder. Number 4. Making light and heat last through the dark. Before the meter on the wall, light was something a family made, and a child learned not to waste it. They learned to make a rushlight, a stem of soft rush, stripped and dipped in waste kitchen fat, that burned with a steady flame for a halfpenny a year, where a candle cost a fortune. They learned to set the work of the house by the light, the close work done by the window in daytime. The family gathered round a single lamp at dusk to share its light, the fire banked to throw heat where it was needed. A child understood in their bones that warmth and light were finite and precious and made by hand. They sat closer in winter. They went to bed with the dark and rose with the light, and the rhythm of their day was set by the sun rather than the switch. This was not poverty. It was a relationship with energy that we have entirely lost. You do not think about where your light comes from. You flick a switch, and somewhere a company you will never see adds it to a bill, and the price rises every year, and you pay it because you no longer have the first idea how to make light for yourself. The rush still grows in every wet ditch in Britain. The fat still renders from every joint. A child once turned both into an evening's light for almost nothing. She made the dark warm and the evening bright with a rush and a saucer of fat. We rent our light by the unit and call ourselves advanced. Number 3. Keeping the kitchen alive with a sourdough start. Nobody wrote this one down because it was too ordinary to mention. In 1,000 British kitchens, a crock of living dough sat by the warmth of the range, fed with flour and water, carrying the same culture year after year. Sometimes the same starter passed from mother to daughter for 50 years. A child's morning job was to feed it, to stir it, to know by its smell whether it was ready. From it came the daily bread, no shop required, a loaf leavened by wild yeast that cost nothing but flour, water, and attention. The child learned to knead, to know the dough by feel, to judge the heat of the oven with a hand and a scattering of flour. Your grandmother did not need a study to know the bread was good. Her family was fed on it from the cradle, and the starter outlived her. It nearly vanished entirely when factory bread arrived, leavened in 2 hours by industrial yeast and sold as progress. The yeast is still in the air, in the flour, on your own hands. The bread is still possible. We simply handed the keeping of it to a factory. Number 2. Sharing the surplus so the whole street survived. This skill was the one that bound all the others together, and every child grew up inside it. When your family killed a pig, the meat could not all be kept, so it went round the street, and when your neighbor killed theirs, it came back. The glut of plums went to the house with none. The eggs the hens overproduced went to the old woman who kept no hens. A child grew up watching this constant, quiet circulation and learned, without being told, that you do not survive alone. You survive as a street. There was a name for it in the mining villages of Wales and the fishing towns of Cornwall. You looked after your own. The child who carried a covered plate to a neighbor's door was learning the oldest survival technology there is, the web of obligation that means that when your own hard times come, and they will, you are not facing them by yourself. He never let a neighbor go hungry, because he knew his turn would come. We replaced the street with the supermarket and the food bank, and called the result independence. The plate stopped going round, the door stopped knocking. Number 1. This is not a skill. It is everything the skills were for. Picture the child your great-grandmother was. At 12 years old, in the year 1910. She could find water by the lie of the land and read rain in the sky before it fell. She could grow food, gather it from the hedge, trap it in the field, take it from the stream, and keep it through a winter without a machine. She could light a fire and never let it die, make light from a rush, build a wall that would stand a century, mend the clothes on her back, heal a fever from the garden, bake the bread, and carry the surplus to a neighbor's door by 12. Before she had finished what little schooling she would get, she was not remarkable. That was an ordinary child. Every single thing she knew because it had been placed in her hands by the generation before, who had it placed in theirs, in an unbroken chain stretching back beyond memory. The knowledge was not in books, it was in children. That was where it lived. That was how it survived 1,000 years of war and plague and hunger. It was carried, generation to generation, in the hands and heads of the young. And here is what was truly lost. It was not the darning or the snaring or the sourdough, though those were lost too. What was lost was the assumption underneath all of it, that a child was a capable person, trusted with the real work of staying alive, and that the knowledge of how to live belonged to ordinary people and was theirs to keep and to pass on. We did not lose these skills because they failed. We lost them because, one by one, each was taken out of the child's hands and put behind a counter, a license, a meter, a checkout. Find your own water. Now there is a bill. Grow your own food. Now there is a supermarket. Build your own shelter. Now there is permission. Heal your own family. Now there is a prescription. Make your own light. Now there is a meter. Feed your own street. Now there is a food bank. Every single thing that child could once do for herself, we now pay a stranger to do for us, and we have forgotten that it was ever otherwise. The chain that ran 1,000 years was broken in a single lifetime, not by accident, because a child who can feed, warm, house, and heal themselves is a child who grows into an adult who needs very little. And there is no profit in a person who needs very little. But the chain is not gone. It is only gone quiet. It is waiting in an attic notebook, in a grandmother still living, in the willow by the water, and the rush in the ditch, and the hen that does not know there is a war on. The knowledge was always carried in hands. Hands can pick it up again. Pick one, just one. This week, learn to tie a bowline that holds and releases and teach it to a child. Put a sourdough starter by the warm and feed it for a week. Walk a hedgerow and bring home one thing you can eat. Find the coolest north-facing spot in your home and keep your butter there instead of the fridge for a fortnight. Find the recipe book your grandmother left, the one nobody has opened in years, and open it. Then tell me in the comments which one you chose. Tell me what your own grandparents could do, the skill that died with them, the one you wish you had asked about while there was still time. I promise you that somebody in your family knew half the skills on this list, and probably more. These 20 things were not lost because a child stopped being clever enough to learn them. They were lost because we stopped handing them down. That is the only reason. And it means the cure is simple, and it is in your hands. Hand one of them down. The chain ran for 1,000 years. It went quiet in a single lifetime. It can be picked back up in an afternoon.